The rocky outcrop offered little protection from the late summer heat, as 16-year-old Rachel Bennett pressed herself deeper into the shadows of the cave. 5 days had passed since the massacre. 5 days since the screams had stopped. 5 days since she'd watched her entire family and wagon train companions, 17 souls in total, die at the hands of renegade raiders who'd come at dawn, their faces painted for war. Now, as the sun began to set over the Missouri River Valley, Rachel knew that death would find her too. Her water had run out that morning. The last of the dried meat she'd salvaged from the wreckage was gone, and the buzzards. The buzzards had been circling for 3 days. What Rachel couldn't possibly know as she prepared for the end was that her salvation stalked the same ridge she had been watching, in the form of a Cheyenne scout named Thomas Black Horse, whose own journey of redemption would become forever entwined with her desperate survival. This is the story of how a lone survivor and a guilt-haunted warrior found in each other the strength to forge a new path through the untamed wilderness of 1854 Missouri Territory, a partnership that would save not only 2 lost souls, but an entire settler community teetering on the edge of annihilation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The screams still echoed in Rachel's mind as she huddled deeper into the cave's darkness. Dawn had been peaceful enough. The Bennett wagon train had pulled out of Independence 23 days prior, heading west toward Oregon Territory, where her father, Reverend Matthew Bennett, intended to establish a mission among the native tribes. Rachel had been the eldest of 4 children, with twin brothers Timothy and Samuel, aged 12, and little Emma, barely 6 years old. Their mother, Elizabeth, had been looking forward to the adventure, though Rachel suspected she worried more than she let on about the journey ahead. The attack had come without warning. They'd stopped to rest the oxen beside a creek just 40 miles west of Independence. Mr. Thomas Whitmore, their trail guide, had assured everyone the area was safe. They were still in Missouri, well within settled territory, with a cavalry outpost barely 5 miles to the south. That's why no one had posted guards, why the men had unsaddled their horses and the women had let their children wander to the creek to fill water barrels. Rachel had been the only one slightly uphill, gathering kindling for the evening fire when she heard the first war cry. She spun around to see riders pouring down from the ravine to the north, 15, maybe 20 men, their faces smeared with red and black paint, rifles in hand. They weren't military regulars, and they weren't the organized war parties Rachel's father had described in his careful lectures about native customs. These were something else, a mixed band of renegades, some wearing bits of cavalry uniform, others with feathers in their hair, all riding as one murderous unit. The sound of gunfire exploded across the valley. Mrs. Whitmore's horse reared in terror, throwing her to the ground. Timothy was running toward the wagons when the first bullet found him. Rachel watched as her brother spun and fell, his red hair brilliant against the dust. Samuel tried to reach him, but was cut down before he'd gone 5 steps. Her father attempted to shield Emma and their mother, raising his arms in a gesture of peace, calling out in what little native language he'd learned. They shot him first, then turned their rifles on the women and children. Mr. Whitmore had grabbed his hunting rifle, but never got off a shot. The Henderson family, parents and 3 children, were clustered near their wagon when the raiders overwhelmed them. The Caldwell twins, young men barely 20, tried to make a stand by the creek but were outnumbered. One by one, the screams faded until only the crackling of burning wagons and the victorious cries of the raiders remained. Rachel had watched it all from behind a boulder, her hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her sobs. When the raiders began rifling through the dead, taking scalps and gathering spoils, she'd crept backward into the timber, then run, as she'd never run before, branches tearing at her dress, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She'd kept running, until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to collapse beneath her. Only then did she dare to look back, to see the smoke rising from the burning wagons, black against the afternoon sky. That first night, Rachel had hidden in a dry wash, terrified that the raiders would come looking for her. She'd listened for horses' hooves, for voices, for any sound that meant death had found her trail. But none came. By dawn, she'd forced herself to creep back to the massacre site, driven by a desperate hope that someone else might have survived, that somehow her family might still breathe. The scene that met her eyes was worse than anything she could have imagined. The wagons were charred skeletons. Her father lay where he'd fallen, scalped, his Bible torn and scattered in the dust. Her mother and Emma had been. Rachel couldn't look. She'd turned away and emptied her stomach among the rocks, retching until there was nothing left but bitter bile. Timothy and Samuel lay side by side, her twin brothers who'd argued over whether Oregon or California offered better opportunities, now silent forever. But survival instinct had taken over where grief threatened to destroy her. Rachel had salvaged what she could. A knife, a small hatchet, a blanket roll that had somehow escaped the flames, and a leather pouch containing beef jerky and hardtack. She'd filled a canteen from the creek, avoiding the areas where bodies sprawled in the water, then fled again, this time with a destination in mind. The cave she'd spotted while gathering kindling, a dark slash in the rocky hillside about a mile from the attack site. The next 4 days blurred together in a haze of terror, grief, and diminishing hope. Rachel had positioned herself near the cave entrance, where she could watch the valley below, terrified that the raiders might return to search for survivors. She'd seen wolves and coyotes drawn to the massacre site, heard their howling in the night. Buzzards had arrived on the second day, circling lazy patterns above the carnage. Her water had lasted 3 days, carefully rationed. The jerky and hardtack were gone by day 4. Rachel had attempted to find a spring among the rocks, but had only discovered a thin seep that barely dampened her fingers. Her dress was torn and filthy. The prairie sun had burned her fair skin despite the cave's shade. Hunger gnawed at her belly, while thirst turned her mouth to cotton. By the 5th day, as the sun climbed toward noon, Rachel's mind had begun to wander between memory and hallucination. She saw her mother preparing breakfast, heard Emma singing the hymns their father had taught them. Sometimes she imagined she heard horses approaching and would press herself deeper into the cave, heart pounding. But each time it was only the wind or her own frightened mind playing tricks. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the darkness, though she wasn't sure to whom she was apologizing. To her family for surviving when they hadn't, to God for whatever sins had brought this calamity upon them, to herself for not being strong enough to go on. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the valley, Rachel prepared herself for death. She'd clean her face with the last drops from her canteen, straighten her dress as best she could, and pray. She would not let death find her cowering. Her father had taught her that dignity was a choice, even in the worst circumstances. She was beginning that final prayer when she heard it, the distinct sound of a horse's hoof striking stone. But this time it was real, definitely real, and it was coming up the hill toward her cave. Rachel's body tensed as every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide deeper in the cave, to make herself invisible. But exhaustion and dehydration had taken their toll. She could barely stand, let alone flee. Instead, she gripped the knife she'd salvaged and waited, determined that if death had finally found her, she would face it on her feet. The hoofbeats grew closer, accompanied now by the sound of a man's voice, a low murmur that might have been a song or a prayer. Rachel's heart hammered so loudly she was certain it would give away her position. The horse stopped just outside the cave entrance. Through the screen of brush she'd arranged for concealment, she could see powerful front legs and hooves. A shadow fell across the cave mouth as the rider dismounted. Rachel raised her knife with trembling fingers, knowing it would be useless against a rifle, but holding it anyway. The brush parted, and a man's face appeared. Dark skin, high cheekbones, long black hair bound with a strip of leather. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of obsidian, but something in them made her lower her weapons slightly. He spoke first in Cheyenne, words she didn't understand, but which carried no threat in their tone. Then, surprisingly, in English. "I mean no harm." Rachel stared at him, her mind struggling to process this unexpected encounter. He was Cheyenne. She could tell from his dress and the way her father had described them. But he was alone, and there was no war paint on his face, no hostility in his bearing. "You've been here many days," he continued, his English heavily accented but clear. "The dead in the valley are starting to speak to the wind. And you," his eyes traveled over her condition, noting the sunburn, the torn dress, the signs of dehydration and starvation. "You are close to joining them?" Rachel found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "They killed them all. My family, everyone." The man nodded solemnly. "The raiders who did this are known to me. They are not of my people. They are wolves who run between worlds. But you cannot stay here. The next to find you may not be so merciful." "I have nowhere else to go," Rachel whispered, the truth of it hitting her with fresh force. The wagon train's ultimate destination was Oregon Territory, but that was months away for a prepared party with guides and supplies. She was alone, without provisions in territory she didn't know. The man considered this, then nodded as if coming to a decision. "I am called Thomas Black Horse. I scout for the soldiers' fort. I will take you there to safety." "The cavalry," Rachel's voice caught. "They were supposed to protect us. The post is only 5 miles from where. There are many injustices in these lands," Thomas Blackhorse replied. "But remaining here is certain death. At the fort there will be food, water, shelter. From there, you can decide your path forward." Rachel hesitated, her father's warnings about trusting natives warring with her desperate circumstances. But as she looked at Thomas Blackhorse, she saw something beyond cultural boundaries, a man making a genuine offer to help, perhaps the only such offer she would receive. "I accept your help," she finally managed. Thomas Blackhorse nodded and retreated from the cave entrance. Rachel heard him speaking to his horse, then the sound of something being untied from his saddle. When he returned, he carried a water skin and a small pouch. He offered the water first. "Slowly," he warned as she reached for it with shaking hands. "Your body has forgotten how to drink." The water was the most wonderful thing Rachel had ever tasted. She forced herself to sip rather than gulp, though every instinct demanded more. After several sips, he offered the pouch, which contained something like dried meat but softer and mixed with berries. "Pemmican," he explained, "travel food, will give you strength for the journey." As Rachel ate slowly, savoring each bite, Thomas Blackhorse stepped back outside. She could hear him surveying the area, perhaps checking for danger or calculating their route. The simple kindness of food and water brought tears to her eyes, the first she'd shed since the massacre. Perhaps survival was possible after all. And Thomas returned. His expression was grave. "The sun will set soon. We cannot reach the fort before dark, and these trails are dangerous in darkness. We will ride to secure shelter and continue tomorrow." "Shelter?" Rachel asked, fear creeping into her voice. Where would they stay? Would he try to take her to his village? Despite his kindness, uncertainty gnawed at her. Thomas seemed to understand. Her hesitation. There is a settler cabin 2 hours' ride south. The family, the Clarks, trade with my people. They will welcome us and ask no difficult questions. Tomorrow, we reach the fort. Relief washed over Rachel. A settler family meant familiar customs, familiar faces. It wasn't Oregon territory, but it was a start. With renewed determination, she gathered her salvaged belongings and prepared to leave the cave that had been both refuge and prison for 5 terrible days. As Thomas Blackhorse helped her mount his horse, a paint named Storm Cloud, Rachel looked back toward the valley where her old life had ended in blood and fire. Somewhere down there, her family lay unburied, their dreams unfulfilled. The wagon train's ambitious journey west had come to an abrupt and violent conclusion, but as Stormcloud began picking his way down the rocky slope, carrying Rachel toward an uncertain future, she realized that sometimes survival demanded leaving the past behind. Her family would have wanted that. Her father had always preached about redemption and second chances. Perhaps this was hers. Thomas Blackhorse rode behind her, his presence strange yet reassuring. Rachel didn't know why he'd chosen to help her, but in this vast and dangerous territory, she would accept whatever assistance Providence provided. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of calmer mornings before the world went mad with violence. As they descended the hill toward whatever came next, Rachel Bennett prepared herself for transformation. The girl who'd gathered kindling 5 days ago was gone, consumed by the same flames that had taken her family. In her place was someone else entirely, a survivor who would have to forge a new identity in this untamed land, guided by an unlikely savior whose own story remained a mystery. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Clark homestead appeared in the gathering, dusk like a mirage of civilization amidst the untamed prairie. Unlike the hastily constructed cabins Rachel had seen along the trail west, this structure spoke of permanence, whitewashed logs, glass windows that gleamed orange in the sunset, and a stone chimney already puffing smoke from what Rachel imagined would be the evening meal. They built this 3 years ago, Thomas Blackhorse explained, as Stormcloud carried them down the gentle slope toward the cabin. Jonas Clark came from Pennsylvania to trade furs and stayed for the land. His wife teaches their children and any settler families brave enough to stay this far from independence. Rachel's fingers tightened around the saddle horn. 3 years, an eternity on the frontier. How had they survived where so many others, including her own family, had perished? As if reading her thoughts, Thomas continued, "The Clarks respect the old ways while embracing the new. They trade fairly with Cheyenne and Cherokee alike. They learn our medicines and we learn their farming techniques. Balance brings survival." The cabin door opened before they reached the yard. A woman emerged, tall and spare like the prairie wind had carved away all unnecessary softness. Her auburn hair was tied in a practical bun, and her dress showed multiple patches, yet remained clean. Behind her peered 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging from perhaps 8 to 14 in age. "Thomas Blackhorse!" the woman called out, shielding her eyes against the last rays of sunlight. "We didn't expect—" Her words died as her gaze fell on Rachel, taking in the torn dress, the sunburned skin, the hollow look of recent trauma. "My lord, child, this is Rachel Bennett," Thomas introduced as he helped Rachel dismount, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle. "She needs sanctuary." Jonas Clark appeared from what must have been the barn, a stocky man with powerful forearms and gentle eyes. He assessed the situation in seconds. "Samantha, prepare the wash basin and some of your spare clothes. Children, help our guests with their horse. Thomas, there's coffee keeping warm and I'll bet you both could use some." The Clarks moved with Practiced efficiency, asking no questions as they ushered Rachel inside. The cabin's interior struck her as impossibly spacious after 5 days in a cave. A large table dominated the center room, surrounded by benches that spoke of family meals and community gatherings. Shelves lined the walls, holding books, jars of preserved food, and curious artifacts that suggested trading with many cultures. Cheyenne beadwork sat beside, Mexican pottery, and what looked like Chinese teacups. Samantha Clark led Rachel to a corner behind a quilt hung for privacy. "Take your time, dear. The water's warm, and I've set out clean clothes. They might be a bit large, but they'll do for now." Her voice held a maternal kindness that broke through Rachel's numbness. As Rachel washed away 5 days of grime and horror, she overheard the men's conversation through the quilt partition. "Raiders hit the Bennett wagon train 5 days past," Thomas was explaining. 17 dead. Mixed band, renegades from several tribes, plus maybe deserters from the fort. "God almighty," Jonas whispered. "How far out?" 40 miles west. Near Devil's Creek crossing. The sound of Jonas's fist hitting the table made Rachel jump. That crossing's been trouble for months. Complaints from passing trains about shadowy riders watching from the ridge. I sent word to Fort Mitchell, but the new commander? He trailed off, perhaps reconsidering harsh words. "Commander Williams has other priorities," Thomas finished diplomatically. "The spring uprising in Kansas has most troops deployed south." Rachel emerged from behind the quilt, swimming in Samantha's brown dress, but feeling human again for the first time in days. The children stared with undisguised curiosity. The eldest boy with Thomas's bronze complexion, but the mother's red hair, clear evidence of the family's mixed heritage. "Sit, child," Jonas gestured to the bench. "Tell us what you can manage. No more if it's too fresh." Rachel found herself recounting the massacre, though she kept details sparse, especially with children present. The Clarks listened without interruption, their expressions carefully neutral. Only when she finished did Jonas speak. "You're the first survivor I've heard of in all my years out here. That takes strength, young lady." "Strength and providence," Thomas set down his coffee cup with care. "The dead require proper burial. I will lead a party tomorrow to tend to them." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She'd thought exhausted. "There are wolves, the buzzards. We'll see it done right," Jonas promised. "Now eat. Samantha's stew will put some life back in you." The meal passed in relative silence, though the stew was indeed the finest thing Rachel had tasted in weeks. As the children cleared dishes, Samantha gently probed Rachel's background. "You said your father intended to establish a mission. Among which people?" "The tribes in Oregon Territory. He studied their cultures extensively back in Ohio. Said understanding must come before conversion." Rachel paused, considering her father's idealistic views. I suppose that made him unusual for a missionary. "Understanding is the beginning of peace," Thomas observed, surprising them by joining the conversation. Usually, he remained quiet in settler company. "Your father was wise. Much good it did him," Rachel responded bitterly, then immediately regretted her tone. Thomas studied her carefully. "Wisdom and tragedy are not opposites. Often they are companions on the same path." Something in his eyes suggested personal experience with this truth. Rachel wanted to ask about his story, how he came to scout for the army, what brought him to that cave at precisely the moment she needed rescue, but exhaustion was catching up with her. Samantha noticed her suppressed yawn. "Mary, show our guest to the loft. You'll share with the boys tonight, Rachel. I know it's not private, but it's perfect," Rachel assured her. Anything with a roof and human company felt like luxury. As the children led her to the ladder, Thomas rose. "I'll return tomorrow to escort the burial party. Rest now. Tomorrow begins your healing." His words proved prophetic. The next week unfolded in a pattern of small mercies and gradual recovery. Each morning, Rachel woke in the loft, shared with the Clark children, the rope bed more comfortable than anything she'd slept on during the wagon train journey. Samantha provided more suitable clothing, dresses that fit properly and could withstand prairie life. True to his word, Thomas returned the following day with Jonas and 3 other men from nearby homesteads. They rode to Devil's Creek Crossing. With tools and respect for the dead, Rachel wanted to join them, but Samantha gently but firmly insisted she remain at the cabin. Remembering them as they lived serves both you and them better than seeing them as they fell, she counseled, putting Rachel to work grinding corn for bread, simple tasks that kept hands busy while allowing the mind to process grief. The children, too, seemed determined to help her heal through inclusion. Mary, the eldest at 14, appointed herself Rachel's protector, sharing the responsibilities of cooking and caring for her younger brothers. 10-year-old William proved an endless font of information about the local area, while 8-year-old James showed off his collection of interesting stones and bird feathers with childish pride. "Did Thomas Black Horse save you from the raiders?" James asked one afternoon as they collected eggs from the hen house. The boy's directness made Rachel smile for the first time since the massacre. "Not from the raiders directly. He saved me from dying alone in a cave after I escaped. He's saved lots of people," William added importantly. "Papa says he's the best tracker in the territory, can find anyone, anywhere." "How did he come to work with the fort?" Rachel asked carefully, her curiosity about her rescuer growing daily. The boys exchanged glances that suggested there was a story they weren't supposed to share. Finally, Mary, who had appeared without them noticing, answered. "He was captured by the army 3 years ago during a raid that wasn't really a raid. His band was peaceful, traveling to winter grounds, but soldiers got spooked and opened fire. Thomas fought back to protect children and elders, killed 2 troopers before they subdued him." Rachel listened with growing amazement as Mary continued. "They wanted to hang him, but Papa testified that Thomas's people hadn't broken any treaties. The new commander back then offered him a choice, hanging or scouting for the fort to prove his people's peaceful intentions. He chose life to save his family's honor," William added. "Papa says Thomas reports real threats, but warns his people about worthless commanders like—" A sharp look from Mary cut off whatever criticism the boy had been about to voice. This revelation changed Rachel's perspective entirely. Thomas Black Horse wasn't merely a scout. He was a man walking a knife's edge between 2 worlds, his position with the army both a burden and a tool for protecting his people. When Thomas returned, that evening, the burial complete, Rachel found herself viewing him with new eyes. He carried himself differently now that the dreadful deed was done. Some weight lifted, though solemn purpose remained. "They rest properly now," he reported quietly to the assembled family. "All 17, with markers bearing their names. The raiders left nothing of value, but I gathered the personal items that remained for you to decide their fate." He produced a small bundle, a pocket watch she recognized as her father's, her mother's Bible with only minor damage, and incredibly, Emma's rag doll, somehow protected from the flames. Rachel accepted these treasures with trembling hands. That night, for the first time since the massacre, Rachel dreamed without terror. She woke before dawn to find Thomas sitting outside the cabin, apparently keeping watch. "The nightmares will fade," he said when she joined him on the porch steps, neither of them acknowledging the tears that had wakened her. "But the dreams of who they were will remain." "How do you know?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I lost my own family when I was 16, parents, 2 sisters, to spotted sickness brought by traders. Dreams kept them alive inside me." Rachel considered this. "Is that why you helped me?" "Because you understood. Grief recognizes grief," he replied simply, "and leaving someone to die alone when you could have helped is its own form of death." Over the following days, a routine emerged. Rachel assisted Samantha with household duties, learning to preserve food, tend the garden, and care for the livestock. The children treated her more like a cousin than a guest, especially when she demonstrated her education by helping them with their lessons from the worn textbooks Samantha used. Thomas visited every third day, officially reporting to Fort Mitchell, but stopping at the Clark homestead on his return trips. He never stayed overnight, but would sit with the family for supper, sharing news from the broader territory while asking nothing about Rachel's plans for the future. It was Jonas who finally broached the subject one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Rachel, you're welcome to stay as long as you need, but winter's coming in 3 months, and eventually you'll need to decide your direction." Rachel had been avoiding this reality. "I have family in Ohio, my father's sister, but the journey now would be foolhardy alone," Jonas agreed. "Winter especially. But spring will bring wagon trains again." The fort maintains lists of available escorts for travelers, Thomas added. Soldiers going east when their service ends, trusted scouts, family groups returning to established states. The conversation planted seeds of planning in Rachel's mind. She couldn't hide forever in the Clark homestead's protective embrace. But for now, the autumn weeks stretched before her like pages yet to be written. One particular afternoon stood out as marking her transition from victim to survivor. Working in the garden with Samantha, Rachel spotted movement at the forest's edge. Her body tensed, ready to flee, before recognizing Thomas emerging from the trees. "Riders approaching from the east," he reported, his tone suggesting neither threat nor welcome. "Military patrol, 8 men. They'll reach us before sunset." "Commander Williams's men?" Jonas asked, joining them from the barn. "Lieutenant Morrison leads them. He's investigating reports of the raid survivors." Rachel's stomach clenched. "They're looking for me?" "News travels fast on the frontier," Jonas explained. "The fort hears everything eventually." Lieutenant Jonathan Morrison proved to be a career soldier in his early 30s, his bearing professional, but his eyes holding the weariness of too many years in contested territory. He accepted Jonas's offer of hospitality while his men made camp by the small stream. "Miss Bennett," Morrison addressed her formally after supper, "I'm grateful to find you well. When we received word of survivors from the Devil's Creek Massacre, frankly, I feared the information was exaggerated." "There was only me," Rachel confirmed, though saying it aloud still felt unreal. Morrison's next words caught everyone's attention. "Our investigation suggests the raiders who attacked your train aren't finished. They've struck twice more since smaller groups, but the pattern suggests they're heading west." Thomas, who had chosen to remain despite his usual reticence around military, spoke up. "Where?" "Miller's Valley, then closer to Fort Sullivan. We believe they're following the overland trail, possibly all the way to California." The implication was clear. More wagon trains could be at risk. "What do you plan to do?" Jonas asked what Rachel hadn't dared. "Patrol as best we can," warned travelers, "but we're spread thin." Morrison paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Miss Bennett, I understand you witnessed the raiders. Any details could help us identify the specific men responsible." Rachel found her voice strengthening. The cave had made her feel helpless. Sharing what she knew restored some agency. There were maybe 20 riders, mixed. Some appeared Cherokee from their dress, others. She glanced at Thomas. "I can't be certain. Of all tribes. Several wore parts of cavalry uniforms. Deserters," Morrison muttered darkly. "Their leader, a large man with a scar running from his left temple to his chin. His horse was distinctive, black with a white blaze." Morrison exchanged glances with his corporal. "Sounds like Jack Merrick, formerly Sergeant Merrick, court-martialed 6 months ago for stealing from the supply wagons. Disappeared before sentencing." "He had supporters," Thomas asked. More than we realized, apparently. Morrison drained his coffee. Miss Bennet, would you consider coming to the fort to identify any men we might apprehend? Your testimony could be crucial. The request triggered conflicting emotions. Rachel wanted justice, but feared confronting those monsters again. Before she could answer, Thomas spoke. I'll escort her when she's ready. No pressure, no rush. Morrison nodded respectfully. Of course, take whatever time you need. That night, as the military contingent prepared to depart at dawn, Rachel reflected on how the prospect of contributing to the raiders' capture changed her perspective. She was no longer just a victim. She could be a witness for justice. The following weeks brought subtle shifts in the household dynamic. Rachel's confidence grew as she mastered frontier skills, from shooting Jonas's rifle to tracking game with Thomas's patient guidance. The children increasingly sought her company, while Samantha treated her more as a daughter than a guest. One evening, Mary startled everyone by asking, "Are you going to marry Thomas and stay here?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the chimney. Rachel felt her cheeks flush, while Thomas, for once, appeared equally discomfited. "Mary!" Samantha scolded, though Rachel caught her exchange of glances with Jonas. "I'm sorry," Rachel managed. "I haven't thought—" But had she? The attraction was undeniable, though grief still shadowed her heart. Sometimes important questions hide in children's simplicity, Jonas offered diplomatically. Later, walking with Thomas as they checked the evening traps, the tension from supper lingered. "I apologize for Mary's boldness," Rachel began. "She speaks what others wonder," Thomas replied. "In my culture, directness avoids misunderstanding." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the deepening twilight. "You've shown remarkable strength. Rachel Bennet, you've survived tragedy and chosen to continue living, not just existing. That deserves respect. You saved my life." "No. You saved it yourself by choosing to trust instead of dying alone in mistrust." He paused, clearly weighing words. "When winter passes and you decide your path, I would be honored if that path ran beside mine." The declaration, so simply stated, carried enormous weight. Rachel found herself studying this man who had pulled her from despair's edge. Thomas Blackhorse represented everything her world had taught her to fear, yet he embodied the very qualities her father had always praised: honor, wisdom, and uncommon courage. "I need time," she answered honestly. "Time is the one thing healing requires," he agreed. As they returned to the cabin where lamplight promised warmth and safety, Rachel recognized that her journey from the cave had led not just to physical salvation, but to possibilities she'd never imagined. The massacre had stolen her family and her innocence, but perhaps, like the prairie itself, destruction had cleared ground for unexpected new growth. The autumn moon rose full and bright, illuminating the path ahead as Rachel contemplated a future where the boundary between settler and native might blur enough to allow love to cross. The war paint and horror of 5 days ago seemed increasingly distant compared to the man walking beside her, whose protective presence gradually replaced terror in her dreams. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Lieutenant Morrison's request for assistance, the winter's approach, the complex negotiations of her growing feelings for Thomas. But for now, in this moment of tentative hope, Rachel Bennet allowed herself to believe that survival might yet lead to something resembling happiness. The first snow arrived early that year, dusting the prairie in October like fine flour sifted from heaven's kitchen. Rachel stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes dance and swirl, their delicate patterns a stark contrast to the hardening resolve in her heart. Lieutenant Morrison's request had awakened something fierce inside her, a need not just for justice, but for purpose beyond mere survival. "There's riders coming," William called from the loft window. "3 horses moving fast from the west." Thomas had taught the children to watch the horizon, and William had become particularly observant. Rachel joined him at the window, her stomach tightening with familiar anxiety until she recognized one of the riders, Thomas himself, accompanied by two Cheyenne men she'd never seen before. Jonas was already outside when they arrived, and Rachel could hear the urgency in Thomas's voice as he dismounted. The raiders struck again. 2 days' ride west. A supply train bound for Fort Sullivan. 5 men dead, wagons burned. Dear God, Samantha breathed, appearing beside Rachel in the doorway. Thomas continued, his face grave. But this time, they made a mistake. Left one of their own behind, wounded, caught in the wagon's wreckage. He's alive. The implications struck Rachel immediately. Did he say anything about the other attacks? He's at Fort Mitchell now, under guard. Commander Williams sent me to ask if you're ready to identify him. Thomas's obsidian eyes met hers steadily. No pressure. The man is badly burned, delirious with pain. I'll go, Rachel said without hesitation. Samantha placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Rachel, are you certain? The raiders won't stop if seeing this man can help catch them. She paused, surprised by her own determination. I need to do this. Within the hour, they were riding toward Fort Mitchell, Rachel, Thomas, and Jonas, who insisted on accompanying them. The Clark children watched from the porch as they departed, Mary wringing her hands despite her attempt at brave smiles. Samantha had prepared warm clothes and provisions, her maternal efficiency masking deeper concerns. The fort bristled with activity when they arrived. Soldiers prepared for patrol, while others tended to horses in the central courtyard. Commander Williams, a florid-faced man in his 50s, met them at the entrance. Miss Bennett, he acknowledged with a curt nod. I appreciate your willingness to assist. The prisoner is this way. The man lay in the fort's infirmary, his face a mass of bandages revealing only pain-glazed eyes. Burns covered his left arm and shoulder, and his breathing rasped like autumn leaves. Do you recognize him? Williams asked. Rachel studied what she could see. The man's build seemed familiar, but the injuries made identification difficult. I'm not certain. May I ask him something? At Williams's nod, Rachel approached the bed. The man with the scar, Merrick. What's the name of his horse? The wounded man's eyes focused briefly on her face. Devil's Dance, he gasped. The name triggered a flash of memory, that black horse with the white blaze, its rider shouting orders as her family fell. That's him, she confirmed. He was among the raiders. His name is Frank Doyle, Williams provided. Former corporal, deserted 6 months ago. He's confirmed Merrick leads their band, using an old trapper's cabin in the Smoky Hills as their base. Thomas had remained silent, observing. Now he spoke. The Smoky Hills are Cheyenne territory. The elders should know of this presence. Williams bristled. This is a military matter, Black Horse. It's a matter that affects all who live in these lands, Thomas countered evenly. My people have been blamed for raids committed by others. Clearing this confusion serves everyone. The tension between Thomas and Williams was palpable. Layers of history Rachel didn't fully understand. Jonas intervened diplomatically. Cooperation has served us all well thus far, Commander. Perhaps combined forces would be most effective. Williams's jaw worked as he considered. Very well, a joint patrol then. Black Horse, you'll guide, but any engagement requires my approval. Outside the infirmary, Thomas pulled Rachel aside. His face showed concern unusual for his typically controlled demeanor. You showed great courage in there. Not everyone could face reminders of their trauma. I had a good teacher, she replied, meaning more than he might realize. His steadying presence had given her strength. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Jonas's approach broke the spell. Commander says we ride tomorrow at dawn if weather holds, Jonas reported. 30 men, plus Thomas's recommended scouts. That evening, gathered around the Clark family table, plans took shape. Rachel insisted on joining the expedition despite protests. "I've seen their faces. I can identify them if captured," she argued. "Military patrols are no place for—" Williams began. "For what? A woman? I've survived their attack already." Rachel's voice held steel none had heard before. "And you need witnesses who can testify in military court." Samantha provided crucial support. "She's right. And if Thomas represents Cheyenne interests, Rachel can represent civilian victims." Williams eventually capitulated, though his disapproval remained evident. The expedition would include 30 soldiers, 3 Cheyenne scouts recommended by Thomas, Jonas as local knowledge guide, and Rachel as potential witness. The night before departure, unable to sleep, Rachel found herself on the cabin porch, where Thomas kept his customary watch. "You don't have to prove anything," he said quietly. "Surviving the first attack already showed remarkable strength." "I have to do this," she replied. "Not just for justice, for myself, to show I'm not that terrified girl in the cave anymore." "The tomb and cave didn't make you weak. It preserved your life for greater purpose." His words reminded her of something she'd been meaning to ask. "Thomas, when you chose to scout for the army instead of—" "Why? Death would have been easier," he admitted. "But my sister's children, they needed family. My mother needed her last son. Honor isn't just meeting death bravely. Sometimes it's living through humiliation to protect those you love." "Do you regret it?" "Every day, and every day I find new reasons it was the right choice." He turned to face her fully. "Finding you in that cave, perhaps that was one of those reasons." The intimate confession hung between them like morning mist. Rachel felt her heart responding to his presence in ways grief had made impossible mere weeks ago. "When this is over," she began, then stopped, uncertain how to voice her thoughts. "When this is over," Thomas echoed, "we'll face whatever comes next together, if that's what you choose." Dawn broke grey and cold as the expedition assembled. Rachel wore practical, riding clothes Samantha had made, buckskin pants under a split skirt, wool coat and gloves. A rifle Jonas had gifted her hung in its scabbard, and she'd proven adequate with it during practice sessions. The Cheyenne scouts, Running Deer, Redstone and Standing Wolf, appraised her with curiosity but no hostility. Thomas's explanation, that she sought justice for murdered family, earned their respect. Williams addressed the group before departure. "We hunt men who've brought shame to the uniform and suffering to innocent people. Capture alive if possible. Evidence for trial serves justice better than frontier vengeance." They rode hard, changing horses at the halfway point where fresh mounts awaited. The smoky hills rose before them like ancient guardians, their slopes thick with pine and hiding countless secrets. On the second day, Running Deer returned from ahead. "Smoke. 2 hours north, fresh tracks, maybe 20 horses." Williams called for counsel. "If it's Merrick's band, they're well armed." "They weren't expecting pursuit this soon," Thomas noted. Doyle's conditions suggested the raid was recent. "Should divide," Jonas suggested. "Surround them if possible." The plan took shape quickly. Williams would lead the main force in a frontal approach. Thomas, with his scouts and a detachment, would circle west. Jonas and 5 men would arc east. Rachel, against Williams's protests, insisted on staying with the main group. As they maneuvered into position, memories of the massacre threatened to overwhelm Rachel, but she focused on her breathing as Thomas had taught her, grounding herself in the present moment rather than past terror. The raiders' camp appeared through the trees. 12 men around a fire, horses picketed nearby, too. Rachel's eyes, they looked ordinary, even pathetic. No war paint, no war cries, just men sharing coffee and what looked like cards. But as Williams raised his hand to signal the advance, gunfire erupted from the trees. The raiders had posted sentries none had spotted. Suddenly, chaos reigned as bullets whistled through pine branches. Rachel's horse reared as a shot passed close. She managed to maintain her seat, her rifle ready, though her hands shook. A raider charged through the brush on horseback, and before thought could paralyze. "Action!" she fired. The man toppled from his saddle. The battle seemed eternal, yet lasted mere minutes. Thomas's scouts had approached unseen, their arrows silent and deadly. Jonas's group crashed through undergrowth like avenging spirits. Between coordinated fire from 3 directions, the raiders quickly surrendered. 7 men captured, 4 dead, 2 escaped on fast horses. Among the captured, Rachel recognized faces from the massacre, younger men who'd whooped with excitement as they killed. But Merrick wasn't among them. "He took 2 men north yesterday," one prisoner admitted, said something about checking river crossings. Williams organized the return journey with prisoners secured. Rachel found herself avoiding close proximity to the captured raiders, their presence stirring memories she thought she'd mastered. Thomas noticed her withdrawal. "The first battle is never the last battle," he said cryptically. "Each victory brings its own struggles." Camp that night was somber, despite success. Rachel sat apart, replaying the moment she'd fired her weapon. Taking a life, even an enemy's, weighed differently than she'd imagined. "You did what was necessary," Jonas assured her, sitting beside her at the fire. "Protection isn't murder." "My father preached, turning the other cheek. Perhaps he'd also preach protecting the defenseless." Jonas gazed into the flames. "Mercy and justice must sometimes wrestle. Neither easily surrenders." On the return ride, Thomas rode alongside her often, sensing her internal conflict. One evening, as they made camp, he shared his own struggle. "My first kill in battle was defending peaceful travelers like your family. The man I killed had children. I learned his name later, Swift Arrow. His wife wailed for weeks." Thomas's voice held pain that time hadn't fully healed. "But those travelers lived. 20 souls who reached Oregon because I acted. Does it get easier? No. But understanding your purpose becomes clearer." He met her eyes. "You fought to protect future families. That distinguishes you from those who kill for plunder or pleasure." Fort Mitchell welcomed them back with restrained celebration. 7 prisoners for trial, evidence linking the band to 3 massacres. Rachel's testimony would be crucial, placing her squarely in the legal proceedings. But their success was marred by Merrick's escape. The most dangerous leader remained free, capable of forming new bands, threatening new innocents. In the weeks following, Rachel found herself transforming yet again. No longer simply a survivor, she'd become a participant in frontier justice. Letters arrived from territorial authorities requesting her presence at the capital trial. The army wanted detailed depositions. Her role expanded beyond witness to advocate. Despite the weight of responsibility, she also found moments of lightness. The Clark children treated her as a hero, begging for stories about the expedition. Samantha continued teaching her frontier skills with added complexity now. Medical care for wounds, food preservation techniques, reading weather patterns that could mean life or death on the prairie. And there was Thomas. Their relationship developed naturally, without formal courtship, but with deepening understanding. He taught her Cheyenne words while she helped him refine his English. They rode together often, exploring territory that was becoming more familiar. As autumn advanced toward winter, one December evening, as they returned from checking trap lines, a question had been building finally surfaced. "In spring," Rachel began carefully, "when the trials are done and wagon trains begin again." "Yes?" Thomas prompted when she hesitated. "I need to go to Ohio, to see my aunt, to settle affairs, to explain." She took a breath. "I'd like you to come with me." The proposal hung in the crystalline air, asking a Cheyenne scout to travel east into the heart of what many called civilization carried enormous implications. "Your aunt will accept my presence?" he asked quietly. "My father chose to understand different cultures rather than judge them. His sister shares that wisdom, and if she doesn't..." Rachel paused, surprised by her own certainty. Then she needs to. Thomas was silent so long she feared refusal. Finally he spoke. I've never been east of the Missouri, never seen these cities of stone and iron. We wouldn't stay. The prairie has already claimed parts of me, and there's work to do here, finding Merrick, helping prevent future attacks, maybe building something new. Building what? He asked, though his slight smile suggested he followed her meaning. A bridge. A place where Rachel Bennett and Thomas Blackhorse aren't strange words together, but she struggled for terms. A promise of possibility. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the Clark homestead's lights appearing as stars fell earthward. Rachel realized the cave that had nearly become her tomb had instead proven a chrysalis. The terrified girl who'd hidden there had emerged someone new, not just surviving, but actively shaping her future. As they tended their horses in the barn, Thomas finally answered her invitation directly. I'll ride with you to Ohio, Rachel Bennett, and wherever the path leads after. The simple acceptance, delivered with his typical understated dignity, felt like both promise and prophecy. Their journey together had begun with him finding her in desperate circumstances. Now it would continue, with both actively choosing the other. That night Rachel dreamed not of massacre but of movement. Horses carrying two riders east, then west again, following trails that connected rather than divided. She woke with unusual peace, recognizing that healing didn't erase scars, but transformed them into maps for navigating future challenges. The winter ahead would test them, both the literal cold and the warmth they were building between cultures. But for the first time since the attacks, Rachel faced tomorrow not with mere determination to survive, but with genuine anticipation for what might bloom from careful cultivating. Outside, new snow was falling, covering old tracks while preserving the ground beneath for spring's renewal. Rachel touched her window, feeling the glasses chill as she watched dawn paint the prairie in shades of hope. The territorial capital at Jefferson sprawled across the bluffs like a defiant declaration against wilderness. Rachel had never seen buildings higher than 3 stories, yet here they clustered like stone forests, their windows glinting in the January sun. Thomas rode beside her, his presence drawing stares from citizens unused to seeing Cheyenne this far from the frontier. The governor's residence, Jonas pointed out, as their small party navigated cobblestone streets. He'd accompanied them as guide and character witness, though he planned to return to his family within days. Trial begins tomorrow in the courthouse just beyond. Rachel's stomach tightened. Tomorrow she would face the captured raiders in a formal setting, their eyes upon her as she recounted horrors better left buried. But closure demanded this confrontation, and justice for 17 souls required her voice. Their hotel lodging, arranged by territorial authorities, proved more luxurious than anything Rachel had experienced. Private rooms with real mattresses, hot water piped in, even a dining room with white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Yet the sophistication felt artificial compared to the Clark homestead's honest hospitality. Your first night alone, Thomas observed quietly as they stood in the corridor between their rooms. Is it strange that I'm more nervous about sleeping in a real bed than I was about facing the wilderness? Rachel admitted. His smile held understanding without mockery. Comfort can be its own kind of challenge. That evening they dined in the hotel restaurant. The other patrons' whispers followed them. A frontier woman in simple dress, accompanying a Cheyenne scout, drew attention, despite Jefferson's supposed sophistication. Rachel noticed Thomas's slightly defensive posture, how his hand rested near his knife out of habit. Tomorrow's trial will have newspaper men, Jonas warned between bites of overcooked beef. They'll write about you, about us. The story of frontier justice fascinates city folk. And how will they portray a Cheyenne scout testifying against renegades? Thomas asked pointedly. That depends on how you carry yourself, Jonas counseled. Dignity speaks louder than prejudice, though it doesn't always drown it out. Later, unable to sleep despite the soft bed, Rachel found herself at her window, overlooking the gas-lit street below. A tap at her door drew her from contemplation. The tea. Trial officer sent these, Thomas explained, holding legal documents. Questions they'll ask tomorrow. I thought you should prepare. They spread the papers on the small table in her room, reviewing probable inquiries. Some questions delved into agonizing detail, descriptions of clothing, weapons, voices. Others focused on the raiders' organization, their apparent leader, Merrick, Will. You testify too? Rachel asked. Only if they request. I'm here as witness to your character, not the events. And as... She hesitated, searching for the right word for what existed between them. As companion to someone who faced darkness and chose light, he supplied. That's noteworthy in any culture. Their work session extended past midnight. At some point, Rachel found her head resting against Thomas's shoulder as they reviewed documents, his arm around her offering comfort without presumption. The intimacy felt natural, an evolution of trust built through shared trials. You should. Rest, he murmured finally, noticing her heavy eyelids. Stay a moment longer? The request emerged before propriety could intervene. He hesitated, clearly weighing cultural boundaries and frontier customs against her evident need. Finally, he shifted so they could face each other properly. Rachel Bennett, he said formally, you've shown courage few possess. Whatever tomorrow brings, remember this strength is yours, not borrowed from any gun or companion. I think seeing you across that courtroom will help, she admitted. Then I'll ensure you can find my eyes whenever you need them. Dawn arrived too quickly. Rachel dressed in the formal attire Samantha had insisted she purchase, a deep blue dress with modest lace collar, hair pinned in the style appropriate for court appearances. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The courthouse buzzed with activity when they arrived. 7 men from their captured band would stand trial, with Frank Doyle still recovering, but expected to testify under duress. Rachel would identify them, describe the massacre, and detail the aftermath that led to the expedition. Judge Harrison Caldwell presided, a stern man whose reputation for fairness transcended political leanings. The gallery filled with curious citizens, some sympathetic to frontier victims, others harboring reservations about native involvement in justice proceedings. All rise for the Honorable Judge Caldwell, the bailiff announced. Rachel's heart hammered as she stood. From her witness seat, she could see the defendants' faces, men who'd stolen everything from her in one morning of violence. They avoided her gaze except for one, the youngest, who stared with disturbing intensity. The prosecution called her first. Please state your name and relationship to the victims. Rachel Bennett. I was, the daughter of Reverend Matthew Bennett and Elizabeth Bennett. My brothers Timothy and Samuel Bennett and my sister Emma Bennett all perished on July 23rd when raiders attacked our wagon train. The questions unfolded chronologically. Rachel described her family's purpose in traveling west, the attacks, horror, her escape and survival. Her voice remained steady through most testimony, breaking only when recounting Emma's last moments. During cross-examination, the defense attorney, a skilled man named Whitmore, attempted to cast doubt on her identification abilities. From behind a boulder in the chaos of battle, you claim to have memorized specific faces? Terror burns details into memory, sir. I wish I could forget them, but I cannot. Yet you were traumatized, frightened, hiding. Memories formed under such duress are notoriously unreliable. Thomas caught her eye from the gallery, his presence anchoring her. I spent 5 days alone reviewing those memories, sir. They haunted my dreams. I've hoped since then to never see them again, yet here they sit. Her directness seemed to unsettle Whitmore. The defense turned to questioning her proximity to hostile elements, clearly meaning Thomas's presence. "Is it true you traveled here accompanied by a native warrior?" "I traveled with Thomas Black Horse, a scout employed by the U.S. Army who saved my life and assisted in apprehending these men. How do we know his people weren't involved in planning this raid?" Rachel felt anger flare. These men killed 17 innocents, while Thomas Blackhorse risks his life daily to prevent such attacks. Your question insults not just him, but the truth itself. Judge Caldwell intervened. "Mr. Whitmore, unless you have evidence connecting any Cheyenne to this crime, redirect your inquiries to relevant matters." The trial continued through the morning. Frank Doyle's testimony corroborated Rachel's, naming Merrick as leader and detailing the band's composition: deserters, outcasts from various tribes, criminal opportunists united by greed rather than any cultural cause. During recess, Thomas joined her in a private room the court had provided. "You spoke powerfully," he said, offering water which she gratefully accepted. "Anger is powerful fuel, though not always wise. Your anger has direction and purpose that transforms it into justice." They talked quietly until summoned back. The afternoon brought more witnesses, Lieutenant Morrison describing the aftermath, Jonas testifying about the captured men's identities, Running Deer explaining how the raids dishonored traditional tribal warfare. As testimony concluded, Judge Caldwell addressed the court. "We'll adjourn for deliberation. Verdict expected tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. That evening, Rachel found no appetite for the hotel's fancy dinner. Instead, she and Thomas walked the city's streets, needing movement after hours of stationery. Testimony. "In my village," Thomas shared as they wandered past shops closing for the night, "justice circles bring all parties together until truth emerges. This system of arguing and judging feels—" he searched for words. "Necessary, perhaps, but distant from healing." "Do your people believe justice should heal?" "We believe it should restore balance. Punishment alone leaves wounds that fester." Across generations, they found themselves at the river's edge, where moonlight turned water to silver. Ice formed in crystalline patterns along the banks, winter's artistry creating temporary beauty. "Whatever tomorrow brings," Rachel said softly, "these past months have changed everything I thought I knew about the world." "Change comes whether we invite it or not," Thomas agreed. "Wisdom lies in recognizing what to preserve and what to release." She moved closer, drawn by his warmth against the cold night. "And what would you preserve?" "This." He gestured not at the city behind them, but at the space between them, the understanding they'd built. Connection that bridges difference rather than highlighting it. Rachel understood perfectly. Their relationship defied categories, yet felt more real than anything she'd experienced in her previous life. The guilty verdict came with winter's first blizzard. All 7 defendants convicted, death sentences for those who'd fired on civilians, life imprisonment for the rest. Frank Doyle received lesser punishment for cooperation, his testimony instrumental in the convictions. Outside the courthouse, as snow whipped through Jefferson streets, Rachel felt oddly empty. Justice had been served, but 17 graves remained filled. "It's not enough," she confessed to Thomas as they sought shelter in a nearby shop. "It never is," he agreed. "But it's something, and preventing future attacks, that's where real healing begins." They spent 3 more days in Jefferson completing legal formalities. Rachel's formal statement about the massacre would become part of territorial records. Authorities requested her assistance with a guide for future witnesses, her insights becoming resources for others facing similar trauma. On their last night, the hotel hosted a formal dinner to honor those involved in bringing the raiders to justice. Rachel found herself seated between Judge Caldwell and the territorial governor, fielding questions about frontier life that revealed how little these officials understood their own territory. "Miss Bennett," Governor Moorhead inquired over roast duck, "do you plan to return to Ohio permanently?" "No, sir. The prairie holds my future now." "And will that future include our native friend here?" His tone suggested curiosity without judgment, a rare quality among politicians. Rachel glanced at Thomas, seated across from her, his bearing dignified despite the formal setting's foreignness. "Our futures have become intertwined, sir. The frontier teaches that survival requires adaptation and cooperation." "Indeed," the governor mused. "Perhaps there's wisdom in your experience that could inform territorial policy." The suggestion intrigued. "Rachel, could their unique partnership offer precedent for broader understanding between cultures?" The possibility planted seeds of future purpose beyond personal healing. The blizzard cleared by morning, though knee-deep snow challenged their departure. Jonas had already left for his family, while Rachel and Thomas prepared for their continued journey east. But first, they faced their most challenging destination yet. Fort Mitchell lay a day's ride south. Rachel had requested this detour, needing to confront the place where military failure had permitted the massacre. Commander Williams had extended an invitation, formal recognition of her role in achieving justice. The fort's inhabitants lined up to acknowledge her arrival. Williams, who'd grudgingly accepted civilian and native participation during the expedition, offered sincere respect. "Miss Bennett, your courage has brought resolution to a grave injustice. The army owes you our gratitude," but it was the simple soldier's reactions that touched her most deeply. Several approached with personal thanks for helping punish men who dishonored the uniform. One young private confided that his sister's family had been traveling west this summer until the warnings reached them. "Your testimony possibly saved their lives," he said, struggling with emotion. Rachel clasped his hand. "Then something good has come from all of this." That evening, Williams hosted a dinner on her honor. During the meal, he broached a proposal that caught both Rachel and Thomas by surprise. The Army requires civilian liaisons, trusted individuals who understand both frontier life and military necessity. The position includes travel between Eastern Command and Western posts, carrying information, providing perspective we often lack. He looked pointedly at Thomas. The role might suit someone already walking between worlds, someone whose insights prevent misunderstandings that cost lives. "You're offering employment?" Thomas asked carefully. "Employment with autonomy." And Williams turned to Rachel. "Perhaps with an assistant equally experienced in cultural bridge building." The proposal represented unprecedented acknowledgement of their unique contributions. Rachel and Thomas exchanged glances rich with unspoken communication. "We'll consider carefully," Rachel responded, "though I suspect our immediate future involves a journey to Ohio first. Of course, the position remains open for your return." Later, alone with Thomas beneath the fort's crisp stars, they discussed this unexpected opportunity. It would give purpose to our experience, Rachel mused. Turn trauma into prevention. But it means continued separation from our peoples, Thomas noted. Constant travel, living between worlds without fully inhabiting either. Perhaps that's exactly what the frontier needs. Bridges, not boundaries. He moved closer, blocking the wind that sought to unbalance her. "And are you prepared for a life of constant translation, of being seen as neither fully one thing nor another?" "I already am neither one thing nor another," Rachel pointed out. "The massacre changed me permanently. I can't return to being Reverend Bennett's sheltered daughter any more. Then you can become simply another scout." Their proximity made words less necessary. The connection they'd forged seemed strengthened rather than weakened by the trials they'd faced. Rachel recognized that the cave where Thomas had found her had been a chrysalis as much as a shelter. The girl who'd hidden there had emerged transformed, capable of bridging gaps she'd never before imagined crossing. "The Ohio journey first," Thomas finally decided. "Meet your family, settle your past, then we'll decide together what kind of future to build." As winter stars wheeled overhead, Rachel felt peace settle over her like fresh snow covering old tracks. Justice for her family had been served. Protection for future travelers had been enhanced. And most unexpectedly, she'd found in the wilderness not just survival, but the possibility of love that transcended the boundaries others insisted on seeing. The wind carried distant wolf song, reminding them both that wilderness remained beautiful and dangerous, but they'd learned to navigate its challenges together. Tomorrow would bring new travel, new decisions, new horizons to explore. For now, beneath the infinite stars, the survivor and her unexpected savior stood as partners facing whatever the untamed land might bring. Rachel thought of the 17 souls who'd fallen that terrible day in July. Their journey had ended, but she carried their legacy forward into an uncertain future. Perhaps that was the true meaning of survival, not merely continuing to breathe, but choosing to build something meaningful from loss, to create connections where violence had sought, to create divisions. Winter's cold bit deeper, but neither moved from their contemplation of tomorrow's possibilities. The prairie had tested them with its harshest challenges, and finding them resilient, now offered rewards more precious than any Oregon goldfield. Understanding, partnership, and the promise of making the frontier slightly less dangerous for the next travelers seeking new beginnings. The Ohio River gleamed like molten silver as the steamboat Carolyn Bell churned eastward, each revolution of its paddle wheel carrying Rachel farther from the frontier she'd come to call home. Thomas stood beside her at the railing, his traditional dress replaced by the wool coat and trousers he'd acquired in Jefferson for this journey. Yet even in civilized clothing, he remained unmistakably foreign to the other passengers' eyes. "We pass Louisville at sunset," the captain announced during evening rounds. "Cincinnati tomorrow afternoon." Rachel nodded absently, her mind occupied with letters, 3 carefully crafted pages explaining to her Aunt Margaret the impossible truth of the past months. The wagon train massacre, her miraculous survival, the Cheyenne scout who'd saved her life and won her heart. "You're worried about her reaction," Thomas observed, his perceptiveness as sharp as ever. "I remember her last letter," Rachel admitted. She wrote about the dangers of going native on the frontier, how missionary work required maintaining Christian civilization standards. "And now you bring home a native who has won her niece." Despite her anxiety, Rachel smiled at his wording. "You haven't won anything. We've chosen each other." The distinction mattered deeply. Their relationship hadn't been a conquest or conversion, but a gradual recognition of compatible spirits forged in crisis. Thomas understood the land's rhythms as intimately as she'd once known biblical verses. His culture's wisdom complemented, rather than threatened her own evolving beliefs. Cincinnati emerged from river mist like something from a fairy tale, smokestacks rising like church spires, buildings crowded with impossible density. Commerce and industry hummed with energy that felt simultaneously exciting and overwhelming. "My father's sister lives in the German district," Rachel explained as they disembarked. "She married Heinrich Müller, a clockmaker. They have 2 daughters. I've never met." A hired carriage conveyed them through streets paved with cobblestone, past markets selling goods Rachel hadn't seen since childhood. The smells alone overwhelmed: yeast from bakeries, coal smoke, horse manure, and countless other urban odors foreign to frontier-accustomed nostrils. The Muller house stood 3 stories tall, narrow like its neighbors but proudly maintained. Rachel's knock echoed with finality. Her aunt answered personally, a woman who'd aged considerably since the daguerreotype Rachel carried. Margaret's blonde hair showed silver streaks, but her green eyes remained sharp, widening in recognition before traveling to Thomas. "Rachel?" Disbelief colored her voice. "Dear God, you're alive! We received word about the massacre. We thought—" Her gaze returned to Thomas, taking in his bearing, his attire, the subtle differences even careful grooming couldn't erase. "Aunt Margaret," Rachel began carefully, "may we come in? There's so much to explain." The parlor reflected German efficiency, furniture precisely arranged, a grandfather clock ticking with mechanical certainty. Heinrich emerged from his workshop, followed by two young women who must be Rachel's cousins. The family resemblance was striking. They shared her bone structure, her coloring. "This is Thomas Blackhorse," Rachel introduced formally. "He saved my life and assisted in bringing the raiders to justice." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Heinrich spoke in heavily accented English. "You are welcome in our home. Please sit. Tell us everything." Over coffee and strudel, Rachel recounted her story. She watched her relatives' expressions shift from shock to disbelief to gradual acceptance. Margaret's eyes frequently returned to Thomas, searching for threats or deceptions. "And this liaison with a Cheyenne man," Margaret finally addressed directly. "Rachel, surely you understand the implications." "I understand that without Thomas, I'd be dead," Rachel replied steadily. "I understand that he's shown more honor than any white man who abandoned our wagon train's defense." Thomas had remained quietly attentive, allowing Rachel to navigate family dynamics. Now he spoke, his English carefully measured. "I do not come to claim without giving. Rachel honors me with her trust. I hope to earn yours through actions, not words alone." The simplicity and dignity of his statement seemed to reach Heinrich. "You brought her home safely across dangerous territory. This speaks well of your character." "Papa," the elder cousin Anna ventured hesitantly, "in my reading circle we discussed Mr. James Fenimore Cooper's novels. He writes of noble natives who exist beyond frontier prejudices." "Novels are not reality, Anna," Margaret cautioned, though less harshly than before. "No," Thomas agreed. "Reality requires more courage from all parties." The afternoon progressed in careful steps toward mutual understanding. Rachel noticed Thomas observing the mechanical clock's workings with intense interest, while Heinrich seemed fascinated by Thomas's explanation of Cheyenne timekeeping through celestial movements. Different methods measuring the same passage. Heinrich mused, "Perhaps all peoples share more commonality than we credit." The younger cousin, Elizabeth, proved less reserved. "Did you truly fight raiders? Was it frightening wearing men's clothes on the expedition?" Rachel found herself sharing details that transformed abstract tragedy into personal narrative. Her younger cousin seemed to view her adventures with romantic fascination, while the adults grappled with their implications for proper society. Accommodations proved a delicate matter. Rachel would stay in the small guest room. Thomas, after brief discussion, accepted lodging at the nearby Wagner boarding house where Heinrich had arranged. "It's not that we mistrust," Margaret explained carefully, "but society's eyes see and judge. I must protect your reputation even as we adjust our understanding." That evening, walking Thomas to his lodging, Rachel felt the city's unfamiliar rhythms. Gas lamps creating islands of light, horse-drawn carriages clattering past, strangers whose lives intersected briefly before diverging. "Your family tries to accommodate what they can't fully comprehend," Thomas observed. "My aunt fears what her church congregation would say," Rachel admitted. "The social cost of accepting us as we are." "And you? Do you fear their judgment?" Rachel considered carefully. "I fear losing them as family, but I fear more losing myself, who I've become, to match their expectations." They paused at the boarding house entrance. Other lodgers stared openly at Thomas's presence. "I've survived," Worse than curious stares, he assured her. Tomorrow brings new trials. Tomorrow I'll show you Cincinnati as it should be seen. Not through worried eyes, but with wonder. Their farewell remained restrained by public presence, yet Rachel felt his support across the distance as clearly as when they'd ridden side by side across endless prairie. The following days brought exploration and gradual acceptance. Rachel introduced Thomas to German bakeries, explaining how recipes traveled across oceans, carrying cultural memory. He shared observations about the city's architecture, noting similarities to trading posts that had become permanent settlements. Heinrich's workshop became an unexpected bridge. Thomas's dexterous hands, trained in crafting everything from arrows to ceremonial masks, adapted quickly to assist with clock repairs. Heinrich appreciated his helper's patience with meticulous work. "Your Thomas has good hands," Heinrich confided to Rachel one afternoon. "Steady, respectful of precision." The church service on Sunday tested everyone's resolve. Margaret had prepared the congregation for Rachel's return and her frontier companion, but whispers followed their entrance. Reverend Williams's sermon, coincidentally about the Good Samaritan, seemed providentially appropriate. After service, some congregants approached with genuine welcome, others maintained careful distance. Mrs. Schmidt, the pastor's wife, surprised everyone by addressing Thomas directly. "Mr. Blackhorse, my husband speaks often of redemption through understanding. Your presence challenges us to practice what we preach." "My people believe wisdom grows through questions, not assumptions," Thomas replied. "I'm grateful for your welcome." The social breakthrough came unexpectedly through Rachel's cousin Anna. As a member of the Cincinnati Literary Society, she requested permission to invite Thomas to speak about frontier life, specifically about cultural misunderstandings that led to conflict. "The Society has been discussing Mr. Longfellow's Hiawatha," Anna explained. "They'd benefit from authentic perspective rather than romantic fiction." Thomas's presentation drew a full house to the Society's meeting room. He spoke not with rehearsed speech, but with the natural storytelling gift of his tradition. He shared the prairie's rhythms, explained how misinterpreted customs escalated tensions, and acknowledged complexities on all sides. "The frontier asks all peoples to change or perish," he concluded, "not change by surrender, but by learning which traditions adapt and which must evolve. Survival requires conversation between differences, not conquest of one over another." The applause lasted longer than etiquette required. Questions followed, thoughtful inquiries from educated minds willing to challenge preconceptions. "How does your people's justice differ from ours?" one gentleman asked. "You seek to punish wrongdoing," Thomas explained. "We seek to restore balance. Both serve purpose, but perhaps combining wisdom would serve better still." Rachel watched with pride as her two worlds, frontier understanding and Eastern education, found common ground through his bridge-building presence. The evening concluded with several members inviting further discussions, including the influential Mr. Harrison, whose nephew worked in the Indian Affairs Office. Walking home through gaslit streets, they reflected on the evening's success. "You've changed Cincinnati a little tonight," Rachel observed. "Change flows both ways. This city has taught me that understanding can exist even among those who fear difference." Their growing comfort in each other's public company hadn't escaped notice. Heinrich broached the subject delicately the next day while teaching Thomas. "To adjust a grandfather clock's pendulum, Rachel is like a daughter since we lost touch with her parents. I must ask your intentions." Thomas set down his tools carefully. "I intend to spend my life earning her happiness, if she'll accept that pledge." "Ah." Heinrich considered this. "And children? How would you raise them between two worlds?" "I would raise them to choose bridges over walls, to honor multiple traditions, without surrendering to any completely." Heinrich nodded slowly. "I came to America believing assimilation was virtue. Now I see preservation can coexist with adaptation. The two men worked in companionable silence, understanding forged through shared purpose rather than lengthy explanation. Rachel's remaining days in Cincinnati passed swiftly. She visited her parents' former home, now occupied by strangers, standing before it as a pilgrim at an unfamiliar shrine. She collected family heirlooms from storage, her mother's Bible, her father's microscope and books, items that carried memory across time. Margaret helped organize practical matters, letters from Ohio authorities confirming Rachel's identity, and inheritance rights. She'd received modest funds from the sale of family property, enough to support independent choices rather than desperate necessity. On their final evening, Margaret requested private conversation with Rachel in the parlor. The older woman studied her niece carefully before speaking. "When I received word about the massacre, I prayed for a miracle. When I heard you'd survived, I thanked God for answering prayers. When I learned a Cheyenne scout had been involved..." She paused, searching for honesty. "I questioned whether survival was worth whatever price had been paid. And now," Rachel asked gently, "now I see that the price was prejudice surrendered, not virtue compromised." Margaret clasped Rachel's hands. "Your Thomas bears himself with honor I've rarely observed in titled gentlemen. More importantly, you've retained your essential goodness while gaining remarkable strength. Does this mean you approve?" "It means I trust your judgment and respect his character. The world changes, whether we acknowledge it or not. Perhaps wisdom lies in accepting that some boundaries matter less than others." Thomas's departure gift to Rachel's family spoke eloquently of his thoughtfulness. He'd carved a clock case for Heinrich, not in traditional Cheyenne style, but incorporating subtle geometric patterns that honored both cultures. For the cousins, he'd created matched hair combs, adorned with carefully selected feathers and beads. For Margaret, a leather-bound journal tooled with intricate designs that merged prairie imagery with Christian symbols. As they prepared to leave Cincinnati, the family gathered at the river wharf where westbound steamers departed. Heinrich surprised everyone by addressing Thomas in halting Cheyenne phrases he'd been secretly learning. "Safe travels, brother of my niece. Return when you can." Thomas responded in kind, then switched to English. "You remind me that learning never ends at any age." Anna stepped forward with a bundle of books. "For the boarding school they say you too might help establish literature from many cultures, to teach that humanity shares more than it divides." The gifts multiplied, practical items for frontier life, letters of introduction to her father's missionary connections in Kansas and Missouri, funds Margaret insisted Rachel accept for future endeavors. As the steamboat's whistle announced departure, Rachel embraced each family member, no longer the grief-stricken orphan she'd feared she remained, but a woman forged in adversity and blessed with unexpected love. Standing at the railing as Cincinnati receded, Thomas asked, "Did your aunt's approval matter so much?" "Every bridge between our worlds matters," Rachel replied. "Her acceptance means one less divide to cross." The Ohio River carried them westward as spring emerged across America's heartland. At each stop, they encountered frontier-bound families whose stories echoed Rachel's history. She found herself offering advice, sharing lessons hard-won through survival. "The prairie demands respect, not conquest," she told one young couple in St. Louis. "Learn from those who've lived there longest. Trust isn't weakness, it's the foundation of survival." By the time they reached Independence, Missouri, where their journey had technically begun nearly a year ago, Rachel felt the completion of one circle and the beginning of another. The town bustled with early-season wagon trains preparing for transcontinental journeys. At the camp's edge, they encountered a familiar face, Lieutenant Morrison, now promoted to captain, organizing cavalry escort assignments. "Miss Bennett, Mr. Black Horse," he greeted them warmly. Word reached us about your success in Jefferson, and now you return to us? Not to travel further west, Rachel explained, but perhaps to make the westward journey safer for others. Morrison's eyes gleamed with understanding. Commander Williams mentioned the liaison position. Have you decided? Thomas fielded the question. We believe we can serve by building understanding. Too many die from fear that could have been prevented by knowledge. When can you begin? The spring sun warmed Rachel's shoulders as she contemplated. Their answer. 6 months ago, a cave had sheltered a terrified girl facing death alone. Now that same survivor stood ready to help others navigate the dangerous boundary between cultures, between old and new, between different ways of knowing. The same vast land. We begin today, she declared, her voice carrying the same determination that had kept her alive through winter's darkest nights. As if in approval, a warm wind swept across the prairie, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. The frontier waited, still dangerous, still beautiful, but perhaps slightly less divided than when they'd first crossed paths in desperation and hope. Their true journey together was just beginning, not as conquerors of territory, but as translators of understanding, advocates for survival through cooperation rather than conflict. The cave that had nearly been Rachel's tomb had instead become the birthplace of a partnership that might just help others find their own unexpected salvation. The afternoon sun painted the prairie schoolhouse in shades of gold as Rachel Bennett, Black Horse, stood before 15 expectant faces. Children of settlers, Cheyenne, Cherokee, and mixed heritage gathered in the first official cross-cultural classroom in Missouri Territory. 6 months had passed since her return from Cincinnati. 6 months of establishing what would become known as the Missouri Bridge Academy. Today, she announced, holding up 2 identical vessels, we learn measurement. In English, quarts and gallons. In Cheyenne. She paused, letting Thomas supply the translation from where he assisted at the back of the room. 10-year-old Mary Whitmore, daughter of a settler family, raised her hand. Mrs. Black Horse? Will knowing both help us understand treaty boundaries better? Rachel smiled at the perception. Yes, Mary, when peoples measure land differently, confusion breeds conflict. Understanding both systems prevents misunderstandings. The question demonstrated how far they'd come since establishing the academy that spring. What had begun as Commander Williams's proposal for civilian liaisons had evolved into something more ambitious. A school funded jointly by territorial authorities, progressive church missions, and tribal councils. After class, Thomas joined her in erasing the chalkboards. Their wedding had taken place in autumn, a ceremony blending traditions that drew observers from 3 states. Though some called their union scandalous, more had recognized its symbolism of a changing frontier where boundaries blurred. Chief Red Wing arrives tomorrow, Thomas reminded her. The Kansas delegation will need careful handling. Because of the Merrick rumors? He nodded grimly. 2 months of silence, no raids, no sightings. Some say he's dead. Others claim he's reorganizing in Texas. Rachel set down her eraser deliberately. Jack Merrick, the Massacre's architect, remained there. Unfinished business. The man had evaded capture, becoming a frontier ghost whose very invisibility spread fear. We've prevented 6 potential raids through our warning system, she reminded Thomas. Saved lives by connecting scouts, soldiers, and settlers. Prevention isn't capture. No, but it's something. That evening, while preparing their quarters adjacent to the schoolhouse, a knock interrupted their routine. Sheriff Donovan's successor, a young man named Peterson, brought urgent news. Telegraph from Fort Collins. Riders spotted matching Merrick's description, heading this direction with maybe 40 men. Rachel's blood chilled. The academy has 37 students. Some board here over weekends. I've already sent word to Fort Mitchell, Peterson assured them. Captain Morrison's dispatch arrives tomorrow. Not soon enough if Merrick targets the school, Thomas stated flatly. He specifically targets integration efforts, Rachel added, understanding dawning. We've become symbols of what he opposes. They'd known this day might come. The Academy represented everything the renegade faction feared: cooperation where they demanded conflict, understanding where they sowed hatred. Merrick's band had grown beyond simple banditry to ideological terrorism. We evacuate tonight, Thomas decided. The Clark farm can shelter the children and transform our academy into a battleground, Rachel protested. Better a battlefield than a massacre site. Within hours, they'd organized retreat. Parents who lived nearby collected their children. Others, Rachel and Thomas, personally guided to the Clark homestead 15 miles south. Jonas and Samantha, whose own children now attended the academy, had prepared extensively for such contingency. Your cabin stood when others fell, Thomas reminded Jonas as they verified defensive positions. Distance from main trails helped. Geography buys time, not safety, Jonas replied soberly. We'll need strategy if Merrick actually attacks. By dawn, all children were secured at the Clark homestead, guarded by volunteers from neighboring farms. Rachel insisted on returning to the academy with Thomas and a dozen armed men. If they burn our school, she declared, they don't find it abandoned. Captain Morrison arrived with 40 cavalry troopers as they prepared defenses. The schoolhouse, built partially underground for temperature control, offered surprising defensibility. Miss Ben, Mrs. Blackhorse, Morrison corrected himself smoothly. Your dedication is admirable but perhaps misplaced. We can defend the children without risking you. The academy represents more than buildings, Rachel countered. It represents possibility. If we abandon that without fighting, she's right, Thomas supported. Also, I know Merrick's tactics. He'll send scouts first. When he finds only soldiers, he may bypass this location entirely. Morrison considered their logic. Very well, but at the first sign of overwhelming force, you both evacuate. That's non-negotiable. They spent the day transforming the educational space into a fortress. Desks became barricades. The root cellar was expanded into a bomb shelter. Children's artwork remained on walls, bright reminders of what they defended. As sunset approached, Thomas's Cheyenne scouts returned with intelligence. 43 riders. Merrick leads them. They make camp 20 miles north, questioning settlers about our location. They already know, Morrison concluded. This is theater. Intimidation before attack, Thomas agreed. He wants fear to weaken. Defenses. Then we give him neither fear nor weakness, Rachel declared. That night, as Morrison's men rotated guard duty, Rachel found a quiet moment with Thomas on the schoolhouse roof, overlooking their defensive preparations. I'm not afraid, she admitted. Isn't that strange? 6 months ago, just hearing about raids paralyzed me. 6 months ago, you were victim remembering trauma. Now you're guardian preventing it, Thomas explained. Purpose transforms fear into focus. They talked until stars emerged, sharing memories of teaching breakthroughs, student epiphanies, moments when understanding bridged generational divides. Rachel dozed briefly against Thomas's shoulder, her sleep undisturbed by nightmares that once plagued her dreams. The attack came at dawn, just as Thomas had predicted, arrows whistling through grey light, followed by rifle fire from the north. Ridge, but their preparations proved solid. Children's artwork was safe in the cellar, while the thick walls absorbed impacts meant for softer targets. Morrison's cavalry responded with practiced efficiency, countering Merrick's raiders with coordinated flanking maneuvers taught by Thomas during winter training sessions. This wasn't the chaotic massacre that had claimed Rachel's family. These were prepared defenders fighting for something worth preserving. Rachel took position at a reinforced window, her rifle steady despite her racing pulse. She spotted Merrick easily, that distinctive scar, the commanding presence that terrorized her memories. But memory held no power over her resolve now. The battle lasted 47 minutes by the schoolhouse's large pendulum clock. When silence fell, 7 raiders lay captured or wounded, including Merrick himself, shot through the leg while attempting to retreat. The rest had scattered, their leaders fall, breaking their unified charge. "Stand down," Morrison ordered his men. "The immediate threat is neutralized." Rachel descended to ground level, where medics tended wounded on both sides. 2 cavalrymen had sustained minor injuries. No raiders had died, though several required immediate attention to survive. Merrick lay propped against the schoolhouse foundation, his leg bandaged, his scarred face contorted with pain and rage. When Rachel approached, his eyes blazed with recognition. "You," he spat, "the missionary's daughter, should have died with your family." "But I didn't," Rachel replied steadily. "And because I survived, you face justice instead of continuing your campaign of terror." "Justice? From the woman who beds a savage?" Thomas moved to stand beside her, his presence protective without obscuring Rachel from direct confrontation. "The savage who captured you," he noted quietly. The bitter irony wasn't lost on Merrick, brought down by the very integration he'd committed mass murder to prevent. Rachel felt no triumph, only relief and continued determination. As soldiers secured the prisoners for transport, Jonas arrived with other civilian defenders, reporting that the Clark homestead remained safe. Word spread quickly throughout the territory. Jack Merrick captured, his band scattered, the Bridge Academy defended successfully. The aftermath brought unexpected developments. Territorial Governor Moorhead, impressed by the Academy's resilience and its successful defense through multicultural cooperation, pledged additional funding and official recognition. "Your experiment has proven its worth," he declared during a ceremony at the restored schoolhouse. "Integration, when properly nurtured, breeds strength rather than weakness." Students returned to find their classroom preserved, their artwork intact. The bullet holes in the walls became teaching tools, physical evidence of threats overcome through unity. Rachel incorporated the attack into lessons about historical conflicts and the courage required for peace. 3 months later, standing before the Missouri Territorial Education Board, Rachel presented their expansion proposal. "We request authorization for curriculum development that could be adopted by other frontier schools. Core subjects in multiple languages, shared histories that acknowledge all people's contributions, conflict resolution that draws from various cultural wisdoms." The board approved enthusiastically. Their success had become a government priority as tensions mounted throughout the frontier. More schools meant more understanding, and understanding prevented massacres. Thomas's duties as liaison evolved into traveling instructor, demonstrating tracking, navigation, and communication techniques to cavalry units. His first-hand knowledge of both Cheyenne tactics and renegade behavior made him invaluable for preventing the misunderstandings that sparked conflicts. One crisp November morning, exactly 1 year since the original massacre, Thomas found Rachel at the memorial garden she'd created behind the academy. 17 stones bore the names of those who died that terrible day, her family among them. "Today should be for mourning," he said gently. "Today is for remembering," she corrected. "And recognizing how far we've traveled from that moment." She touched the locket containing her father's and mother's portraits alongside a small pouch Dorothy had given Thomas, connecting all who'd shaped their journey. The memorial wasn't just for remembrance, but for determination. "The church board from Cincinnati sent a letter," she mentioned. "They want to establish a sister academy in Ohio. Margaret's been working with Anna on the proposal. Your family adapts quickly to new realities. People do when given reason to hope rather than fear." As they returned to the schoolhouse, children were arriving for morning lessons, riding horses, walking in groups from nearby farms, approaching from the direction of the reservation. Their diversity was no longer remarkable, but simply the nature of education on a frontier, learning to see strength in variety. During morning mathematics, little Benjamin Schmidt, son of the pastor's wife who'd first welcomed Thomas to Cincinnati, struggled with a word problem about trading goods between cultures. Rachel knelt beside him, remembering when such arithmetic held life or death significance. If the Cheyenne hunter brings 3 buffalo pelts to trade, and each pelt equals 5 bushels of corn— "Mrs. Blackhorse," Benjamin interrupted. "How do we know they agree on the trade value?" "Through communication, Benjamin, through understanding what each side considers fair." The boy nodded, then continued his calculations with renewed focus. Rachel watched, pleased by insight even in young minds. When spring came again, they received news that would transform their mission. The Indian commissioner proposed establishing a network of bridge academies throughout the territory, using their successful model. Rachel and Thomas would travel between locations, training educators and demonstrating integration techniques. "We become bridges building bridges," Thomas observed when they discussed the offer. "Is that what you want?" Rachel asked seriously. "Constant travel? More responsibility?" "I want to prevent young girls from hiding in caves waiting to die," he replied simply. "I want to honor those who taught me that different paths can merge into stronger roads." Their acceptance meant another journey beginning, but this time with purpose rather than desperation. The frontier remained dangerous, but each academy represented one more light against the darkness of ignorance and hatred. On their last evening before beginning their expanded circuit, they stood together outside the original schoolhouse, watching sunset paint the prairie in honey and gold. Students' laughter echoed from the boarding house, where those from distant settlements prepared for tomorrow's lessons. "Sometimes I dream about that cave," Rachel admitted. "Not nightmares about dying there, but curiosity about the girl I was." "She still exists," Thomas assured her, "refined rather than destroyed by fire. And the man who found her, he found himself in finding you," he replied. "We saved each other. Above them, early stars appeared in deepening blue." Rachel thought of her father watching from heaven, of Dorothy's spirit in the rustling prairie grass, of the 17 souls whose loss had catalyzed so much change. Their deaths hadn't been for nothing if others lived because of lessons learned. As darkness fell, they returned inside where lamplight promised warmth and safety. Not the false security of isolation, but the true sanctuary of communities bound by understanding rather than fear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts to prevent, new bridges to build between peoples, learning to see each other as neighbors rather than threats. But for tonight, the frontier was quiet. In the morning, Rachel and Thomas Blackhorse would ride west again, not as fugitives from darkness, but as bearers of light. Proof that survival could lead to strength, trauma could inspire wisdom, and love could indeed transcend the boundaries. Others insisted on seeing. Their story had begun in a cave where desperation met providence. It continued through courtrooms, cities, and classrooms where understanding gradually replaced fear. And it would persist through whatever awaited on the expanding frontier, carried forward by students who learned that difference divided less than ignorance, that respect connected more than conflict, that bridges were always stronger than walls. The Shaisha prairie wind sang through grass and trees, an ancient melody now harmonizing with newer songs, of children learning multiple languages, of cultures sharing wisdom, of a future where the frontier's greatest triumph wasn't conquest, but cooperation. Rachel Bennett, Blackhorse, once the lone survivor of a massacre, had become the mother of possibility for a frontier learning, one bridge at a time, that its strength lay not in separation, but in connection. As Thomas extinguished the lamps, their shadows merged on the classroom wall, two becoming one, just as their cultures had learned to intertwine rather than oppose. Tomorrow would bring new horizons, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate that the most powerful frontiers existed not between territories, but between hearts, learning to trust across difference. The girl who'd hidden in a cave had emerged to help others find paths through darkness. The warrior who'd chosen life over death had found purpose in preserving rather than proving. Together, they'd built something that would outlast any raider's threats, a foundation for understanding that would carry the frontier forward into an uncertain but no longer entirely divided future. And in classrooms across the prairie, children would learn not just reading and arithmetic, but the mathematics of justice, the geography of respect, and the language of cooperation that might yet transform America's expanding borders from battlegrounds into meeting places, from boundaries into bridges. Outside, the eternal stars watched over changing landscapes where possibility flickered and grew, light by careful light, one bridge at a time, toward a tomorrow where the frontier's promise might finally exceed its peril. Up next, you got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.